Yeah, so my name is Jerome. I am a graduate student down at UC Santa Cruz, and I do research on galaxies. And today I'm actually going to switch gears a little bit and have one slide on my actual science, which are these two slides here. So these are just pretty portraits of galaxies, and real quickly, my research focuses on understanding the life story of galaxies, how do they grow and change over time, and trying to understand, is there a connection between this pretty thing over here and this less pretty thing over here? And in fact, we think that there is. And so if you're interested in the science, come talk to me later. I can talk your ear off probably about the science. But today also what I want to talk about is my experience as a teacher. And so I've never been in a room like this, fortunately. But I've had the opportunity to teach a few classes actually at UC Santa Cruz. And so I've done a couple of intro astronomy classes for non-majors. This past quarter I did a class for freshman physics for the life science majors. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about my experiences there, what I've learned, how God has worked through that, and some practical things that we can all take away, especially if we're leading our own classes as TAs or as professors later on. And so to kind of start that, I guess a question for all of us, how many of us have either said or heard comments kind of like this before? Probably, yeah, I will raise my hand and say, yeah, I probably said these things for sure. Something like, how much 20% of the class will fail. That's really a great motivational speech in the beginning of a class, right? The exams are impossible. I hear that a lot. And the professor just doesn't care about students. That's really kind of terrifying. But I would say that at least not all classes, but some classes for sure, tend to fall into this category of kind of a really negative culture and a negative environment for students to work in. And so how can a student actually grow and thrive in a place like this if this is the expectation, right? It's a lot to get through. And so the question really is, how can we take students who enter a class, they might not be particularly motivated, they might be discouraged as well just from the expectations of the professor or other students, and how can we take these students and transform them into people who are actually eager to learn, eager to really dig into the material, and are actually happy to learn as well. Make it as pleasant an experience as possible. So how can we do that? And so I'm just going to talk about two ways of approaching that, and they both begin with C because I like alliterations. And the first one is content. What do we put in a class? What is the material that we talk about and teach, and how do we actually present that? And the second thing, which I think is also really important, is the climate that we produce in a class. As an instructor, you are in a position where you can help shape the experience for students overall. And the key thing is that both of these things are student-centered. And for me, I know certainly it's easy to be up in a room and say, oh, it's all about the teacher. But certainly as Christians, we are told to serve other people, and really getting that mentality into our heads can really help shape how we approach teaching students. And so first, the content. I guess my only real big point I want to take and say is to be relevant in class. And something that I've really learned through my years of teaching is how can you be relevant? Because here we've got the teacher who has a lot of things they want to say. And I know that we're experts in our field and we want everyone to know what we're doing. But there's also this other sphere over here, which is the student. And the student has this also their own little sphere of knowledge, things that they're interested in, expectations they have, goals they want, why are they taking your class? And very often, there's very little overlap, it turns out, between what you as a teacher would love to impart to your students and what the students hope to get out of the class. And that little overlap is relevance. And so I think this cartoon is really a cute way to do that. And so, for example, as a physics teacher and an astronomer, I would love students to know these things. This is just a subset, obviously. Things like thermodynamics, or optics, or how stars work, or how galaxies change over time. I would love for people to know that. But let's be honest, students, at least the ones I've worked with, they're not astronomers. They're not going to be physicists. And so they're interested in their own careers, perhaps. Perhaps they want to become biologists or doctors, or some are artists. I taught a lot of Humanities majors as well, and so how do we actually find some linkage and overlap between them? And what I do in class is to try and make explicit some applications, and so I put these up specifically. For example, when we talk about thermodynamics, I'll talk about cars. Cars you can model them using thermodynamic principles, and so something that's tangible that students can actually get a hold of to help understand the principles as they apply in real life. When we talk about optics, for example, I also spend a day talking about the eyeball and how a physicist will approach vision. And we talk about why people wear glasses and all the different vision problems that can occur. And so I think that's really an interesting way to do it because, at least in my classes, most people don't talk about it. And for me, it's hard to see a bigger picture, like why am I learning this? If all I'm doing is just deriving equations all day, I feel, it's not that relevant, honestly. And so something I try and do in my classes to push as much relevance as I can. And it's really cool when you can be a little subversive in what you're teaching because most curricula don't include some of the topics I do, but I think it really speaks to students when they say, oh, you're really trying to make it a good learning experience for them. And so they see the effort, and I think they respond really well to that. And so that's all I have about content. The biggest thing for me is really the climate. What can we do to foster a warm climate that's supportive of students, that really helps them to flourish in the classroom? And well, our culture, at least my somewhat cynical perhaps view of it, is our culture is all about achievement and success. And if this is the message that students get, there tends to be this perhaps unrealistic pressure to perform and do really well, which we've all probably been through there. I've certainly been in that situation. And this leads to one's identity really getting equated to their level of achievement. And I've seen this also with students where they're really driven to do something and they really take it really personally when something doesn't go right. If they bomb a test, for example, or if they don't seem to understand something, they're really struggling a lot. And I think our culture, unfortunately, perpetuates this. And so how can we change this? How can we break this negative cycle of thinking? And what I really try and do in my class is to find opportunities to affirm the self-worth of students. And so if you were at Winter Retreat, we heard from Francis Su a lot about his grace in teaching. And so a lot of his messages I really carried them with me. And so I do a couple of explicit things in class to promote this. And I'm just showing you a slide that I show in my classes. And this activity is called Values Affirmation, if you're aware of that. And Values Affirmation basically asks students here, what are values that are important to you as a person? And so in class, I ask students to, pick from the list or pick a few values that are crucial and really, make them who they are. And I ask them to list them, and I also ask them to write why it's important to them. And so by doing this activity in class, it gives students, one, an opportunity to really reflect on who they are as people and to remind them of, I'm more than just a grade, or I'm more than just how I do in this class. And it gives them, in some sense, a coping mechanism as well, because in a classroom, it can be really stressful if you're taking an exam, for example, but hopefully by giving them an opportunity to show who they really are in this stressful environment, that allows them to sometimes cope with the stresses of exams, of homework, and of the classroom as a whole. And so this is something that I do in class. They're also a lot of fun to read. I ask students if they're willing to share them, and so I have a stack of them, and it's really fun to read. Another thing I do in class, kind of blurry, but I talk about the idea of a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And so these are two views on intelligence and how people see intelligence and the consequences of each. And the first one is the fixed mindset, which says that intelligence is static. This is the idea that people are maybe born with a certain amount of intelligence and that's it. And because of that, that tends to let people want to look smart, even if they don't feel like they know what's going on. And as a result, they avoid challenges. Obstacles are just really, they give up too easily because they don't want to look like a failure. And effort, I box their effort is seen as fruitless, or perhaps worse, that you're failing, because if I don't get it right off the bat, I just clearly am not good at this, so I will just try something else. And so when you do this, that leads someone down a path of really not growing, because the only way to grow is to really try and improve yourself and put in the time and effort to do it. And confess I'm on the side of the fixed mindset for sure, where if you give up too easily, then you really miss out on the opportunity to really take advantage of your classmates, of your professor, of whatever you're actually learning, and you're just kind of skimming by. In contrast to that, the growth mindset is the flip of that, it's the opposite, and it sees intelligence as a muscle that you can develop with effort and putting in the time and dedication. And it really leads people to a desire to actually learn And challenges are something to embrace rather than to avoid, because, hey, this is an opportunity for me to grow and improve. And obstacles are something that you try and overcome rather than just flee from. And the key thing is that effort is actually the path to mastery. That's how you actually can grow, is that you have to put in the time. And so I tell my students this, and I ask them, how can you guys develop a growth mindset for yourself? And so a lot of students, when they write their evaluations, they say this is really something that's been helpful for them in terms of approaching academics, approaching their own life. And so I think this is another really awesome thing to bring up in class. And just to show that I, as an instructor, do actually care about you as a person, you're not just a name in a roster or something. And so you're actually someone that I really want to help you grow. And so this is another deliberate thing that I do in class. And so in terms of personal lessons, what have I learned from teaching? A lot of it's the importance of relationships. And so really, it's awesome because you have 30 students or 200 students, and you have this opportunity to really connect with them. And so I think building relationships is something that's really an awesome opportunity, because you get a chance to, one, hear about their lives. And so I like to have people, in, whether it's office hours or somewhere else, and just sit and we'll just talk. We won't talk about science or homework. We'll just say, so what are you about? Tell me about you, and I can tell you about me. And so that's a way to really connect with students on a more personal level than just as an instructor. Something I really wish I did as an undergraduate, to be honest, is to really connect more deeply with people, because we're all just human beings, just like Laura said this morning. We're all human beings. And so relationships is something that's really crucial, and I would encourage all of us to really actively go out and pursue that. Also, to be vulnerable in class. I always like it when people are, really real in class. And I was taught before that teaching is a performance where you put on this perfect face and everything is fine, so that students don't try and subvert you or something like that. But honestly, I think that people can kind of see through the fakeness sometimes, and so being real and honest with them is something that really allows you to connect with your students and them with you. And so, like, for example, with the mindsets, I put up a slide which details my struggles with the fixed mindset. And so I go and I kind of embarrass myself actually with examples in my own past of when that has really screwed me up. And so people respond to that, and then they're willing to be vulnerable with you. And so that helps you to really understand who they are as people, and maybe you can help them with their studies or whatever it may be. And then finally, seeking God's approval. That's a big one, because I'm a people pleaser by nature, and it's really easy, especially when you're teaching, if you try and please people, that could be like letting something slide that shouldn't be let slid, right? Like a grade, or I had an incident where I actually did catch people cheating on their homework, and instead of a lot of people, and instead of letting that slide, I really came out and called them out on it, and that terrified me, honestly, because I didn't know what the students would think. And I was really just praying, God, I want to do what you approve of, not what people approve of. And so there was a leap of faith right there. And God really did come through, because my students are, they're gracious people at the end of the day. They really are gracious people. And so it's been a lot of fun. And I'm really looking forward to continuing teaching in the future. So thanks for your time.